So I provided this image, and I want you guys to work with it. And one of the big working tools, one of the big workflows for this tool is portraiture. It's a real common one. Um, so you'll see a lot of tutorials using portraiture, and it works well for a specific use of the tool. And so I thought I would also do a portrait and just show some of the cleaning up techniques that go with that. But there's other reasons to use it, and we'll get into a little bit of that. So let's get going. So I do have like a little, I went ahead and I did a little test, and that's the difference. And you can see that this is actually just straight off of a website, and they're showing how to use the tool, and it's just an image off of, someone showing the tool, and you can see the brush is going over this little spot right there. Probably they're using the healing brush right there. And what's kind of cool is we're going to try and get rid of that. So using the same technology that we've been using here. So we'll clean that up. So you can see that when I got rid of that, I think fairly convincingly. So, and that's before and after, and that's what we're going to work on today. So here's the tools. They're right here. So the three that we're going to work on are the spot healing, the healing brush, and the patch tool. We already used the red eye tool, and so you're sort of familiar with that. The content aware move tool is a bit spotty. It can work, and maybe we'll just try it for fun and just see what happens. But sometimes it works well, and sometimes really not. And like I said, these things they're artificial intelligence. Whenever you see content aware, that's your sort of, okay, that's Adobe talking about artificial intelligence, okay? But I would like to say more augmented intelligence, if that makes sense. But we'll start with the spot healing brush. And like always, up at the top, you'll see your options and what you can work with. There's not very many presets here. Basic brush sizes, we don't really like to use that. We prefer to use our brush again to change that, right? Using the Alt and the Control. And then you have mode, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but normal is what it's set to. But we are going to talk a little bit about this idea of lighten and darken, screen multiply, lighten, darken. This is our introduction to modes, and we haven't used too much of that. I don't believe, maybe a little bit with the exposure, but then you come across, you have content aware, create texture, proximity match, which has this diffusion. And I'm not going to get into the details of these tools. You can look them up. They're much more esoteric, these ones. Most often you're going to be using this content aware, and it works really well. The other thing to pay attention to right here is this sample all layers is usually unchecked. So it's kind of suggested that you have this on. It's most likely going to work better for you because you're probably going to use layers. So that's the basic setup. Remember, this is just only the spot healing brush. Okay, so the idea of spot healing is really, for the most part, about dots, like this little dark spot right here. These little dark spot. Maybe she has a hole for an earring, but no earring right now. But also highlights like that shine on her nose. Okay, the shine in her eyes. So really the image looks fine in a lot of ways, although I think it's a little bit shiny. And so this is like really fine touch up, right? But those are the things that you're looking for. Like, I kind of like the shine lights, but this little white dot kind of bothers me, quite honestly. So, that's kind of what you're doing. You're sort of picking out what stands out to you, what stands out to your eye, and what do you want to remove and what do you not want to remove. Let me zoom back out a little bit. So what I'm going to do right now is with spot healing. So remember, we're talking about dots or spots. Now that's a pretty long, that's not a spot, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be a dot necessarily, but you are talking about small edits, okay? When we want to do bigger edits, we're going to be using something along the lines of the healing brush or the patch tool, okay? But don't be deceived. The spot healing brush is kind of amazing, really, what it can do. You can see there's a stain on that, on this towel or whatever, and they're taking that stain off. It's sort of amazing sometimes what it can do. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to make a new layer, okay? And it'll actually work straight up, just like it is, right? So remember, if I don't have this set up, if I don't have sample all layers, and I'm in this new layer, it's not going to do anything because there's nothing in this layer to fix, so it can't actually fix anything, okay? So you do need to turn on sample all layers. Now, by default, just with its basic settings, you're going to see that this probably will work just fine, and I can just paint on that, and that dot goes away. And you probably won't notice too much in the way of what's going on with it, but what you'll find is that it's going to sample everything, and it's going to affect everything in this whole region, right? So see how it kind of goes through her whole cheek, and I get like kind of this, everything is sampled, everything is dealt with. That might not make total sense right now. Let me see if I can make a better sense of it. Using the normal up here, there's these modes, okay, and they're also here in the layers, right? So on a layer, we have very similar modes, okay, and we don't get too much a chance to talk about these. In my opinion, these are more advanced student kind of information. So try not to get overwhelmed by these, but just do notice that they kind of work in order, and there's a darken area and there's a lighten area, okay? And these kind of work similarly, overlays and those sorts of things that also sort of work with light and dark, okay? Don't let this confuse you with black and white necessarily, but lighter and darker. I did that, lighter, darker, like that. But just notice that they're here as well. And we can do this with layers, but we can also do this with tools, okay? And one of the things that we'll notice is that when we do a darken layer, what it's going to do is it's going to look for anything that's light and make it disappear. And when we do a lighten area, it's going to look for anything dark and make it disappear. It's a bit of a challenge to get used to these things because they kind of reverse. So notice that I made these names right here. We'll do this for our layers, right? So I'm going to name this layer darken for light areas. So it's kind of like the reverse. What are light areas? Highlights. Like on our nose right here, okay? So right now, the way I have it set up is normal, okay, right up here, normal. Let's take a look at this. And you're probably not going to notice too much of a difference, but try to notice how it just changes everything. Do you see how it kind of went down in this area and it got kind of blurry right there? Okay. And each time you do it, again, this is the idea of predictive quality. Every time I click, it sort of samples a different set of things and it'll make different decisions, right? So this is what I'm talking about where you want to be thoughtful about how you do it, okay? So or rather do it a bunch of times, try different kinds of selections, paint different parts and get different, sometimes you'll really, like that looks pretty good, like I like that, right? Whereas before I was getting kind of a little bit of like bumpy look there. But that's just normal. Let's try this. So if we set this to darken, okay, what this means is it's going to look for all the lightest areas, and it's only going to affect the light areas. So what this should do is only affect the highlights. I don't know if that looks that much different to you. Honestly, it's hard for me to see the difference often, but I think you get a better result this way, okay? What it should do is it should just look a little more natural in that you're only going to see the parts that are affected are going to be the lightest areas. When you do this, try to avoid doing like long streaks like that. What you want to try to do is do like small areas. looking okay. So one of the things we'll do is I'll do a little bit more, and I'll do this lip. Take some of the highlight off her lip. A little bit on the cheek here. Do you see how, remember when I painted through there, it really affected that whole cheek right there? Do you see how it's not doing that anymore? It's just only, it's only hitting where there's highlights and affecting them. It's not like very good. Right. And what you'll find is that it's probably going to be too much, right? Maybe I should get a little bit smaller and get in here. Okay. Good. And then let's take a look up in the eye here. Kind of like that right there, but that's kind of standing out to me. So let's get that a little bit. We'll just give it a little bit of a touch. And then now let's go into the eye, and we'll get really get in there, and we'll make that brush a little bit smaller. Just because they were standing out to me, I just don't like it. And then kind of get into this area, and then I get really small. Just get here. Okay. So those are the highlights that were really getting to me. Also, now that I look at it, like this little fleck right here is also bothering me, so I'm just going to paint that out. So I like the highlights, but I kind of like them going away. So now this is the difference, right? Probably shouldn't have painted all through that cheek like that, but whatever, I'll do it. And so now when you look at that, it's like, well, I kind of like some of the highlight. I go, it's too much, right? So here's where we bring it back a little bit. So we'll turn that on, and then we'll use our opacity, right? So remember, you're going to use opacity to help you really fine-tune how much of that shine you want. So we bring it all the way, 0 opacity, see all the shine, and now we can kind of tone it down a little bit so we don't lose all of it, right? So we do like some of that shine. So a little bit of shine, but not so shiny, right? So we want to show that there is light and highlight, but not so much that it totally takes away. So that's using lighten, or rather darken, where we're trying to get rid of highlights. And you can see that this is what it's basically doing, is it painted all that. Now, I kind of didn't really like having all those cheek things there, so if I wanted, I can take my eraser tool, and I could even take that out. Let's make that a little bit softer. So better. Because I was painting on that cheek really like that. So it's actually a whole layer, right? It's a layer of paint, right? But it's painted in such a way that it's different, okay? So that's using the darken. Let's make a new layer, and we'll rename this one, and we'll cancel that. Let's call this lighten for dark. There we go. Okay, so this is the reverse. So now we're going to go in, we'll go to our spot healing brush. Now we're going to lighten. And so with lighten, we're doing the opposite. Now we're looking for all the dark spots, right? So now it's kind of cool, and this is, again, this is specifically useful, especially useful on faces. I think you guys can see. Because oftentimes, we have skin tone, we're not trying to really affect the skin tone, we just want to get these little areas to go away, right? Not always, but sometimes. So now you're just, again, it's weird to edit a face, but we're just going to look for things that stand out to us, and so we'll just take them off. And again, just notice that it doesn't affect, like if I paint in here, just notice it doesn't affect the lighter area, it just only affects the darker area, right? So you can just tone these down a little. And remember, you kind of want to get them to go away, right, on this layer. You're going to use your opacity to bring them back in, right? Brush a little bit smaller. Again, just see how that, it's kind of amazing because it just only affects the darker areas. This is also kind of weird because you start to notice how dirty your screen is when you do this kind of work, because you're like, hey, that's actually not on the image, that's on the screen. So that's happening to me a lot. I'm like, wait, is that? A lot of times it is my screen. Here's one that's on her eyebrow, so a little bit challenging, but we can get in there. See how the hair is darker, so it's going to want to get rid of that hair. So that's going to be a challenging one. Let's see if we can just kind of click up there. I'm not going to worry about this. We're going to take care of that in a moment, but I will work around it. There's that little area there. Get rid of that. Let's make that brush a little bit bigger. And, you know, it can be a little bit annoying to paint, you know, little dots like this, but it does usually work a little bit better if you narrow the parameters down. The more that you click and you drag, the more parameters you add into the algorithm, the more that you're adding in more information that the computer has to try and figure out how to deal with. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it's really not a good thing. The one right there, so let's just get that brush a little bit smaller. Cool. Okay, so again, the little white spots, I might come back and make one more layer and just get that totally gone because they're coming back when we brought that opacity back. So again, now we can bring those freckles back in a little bit if we want. So we could say go into our opacity, drag it all the way back, and we can see a little bit of it, and then we can just tone them a little bit. See that? So you don't lose the quality of the skin necessarily, but you can try to get it to pitch back a little bit so that it's not quite as noticeable. Certain things you want totally gone. So if I want those little specks on the eyes, we'll call this layer gone. So still don't like these little specks, so I'm going to go to darken, take them out. Just don't want them there at all. And again, sometimes you have to multiple click on it. You know, don't just sit there like expecting it to go away. Some of these are. Is that my screen? No, that's. We're on lighten though, so let's go to darken, or darken rather. Let's go to lighten. So you see how that wouldn't go away because I was on darken. So it won't take that away. But if I turn this to lighten, see that? Can be a little, you know, counterintuitive because you know you're trying to get rid of a dark area, but you need to be on, you know, lighten. I can see how it can be a little challenging. I know I get kind of caught up in that a lot. Just like wait, kind of feel like I want that one just stands out. And when you're doing this kind of work, in my opinion, it's a little bit weird to work on a human, but whatever. You know, editing a face, but it's not that much dissimilar to makeup, I guess. You're just kind of looking at what's, you know, what stands out to your eye and toning it down or enhancing what you're trying to enhance. So that's what it looks like. So now if we solo this, so I'm gonna hold Option. That's the way to solo a layer, by the way. Just yeah, that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like. It's a pretty big difference, really, but also not that big a difference. I mean, you can still kind of see the bits there, but that they're just kind of toned down a little bit, right? Um, maybe maybe I kind of more I look at this and more like some of these darker spots I kind of like. I might want to bring them back. I like kind of like some of them, but not all of them. So maybe I will eventually choose to bring that back. But for now, we'll leave it as it is. And that's the basic spot healing. And for the most part, that's probably the most common tool you'll probably end up using than the other ones. But let's talk a little bit about the patch, or not the patch, but the healing brush tool is a different tool. So the healing brush tool works, again, it's a brush, so the same things. You select out a brush, you make the size of the brush. Um, you have the same qualities of multiply, screen, those sorts of things, all right? You replace or normal. I'm going to keep this at normal. This one's a little bit different because this requires a sample, and for sampling, a lot of people have a hard time with sampling. But when you sample, it means you're sampling a section of something, like you try something out, like you taste it before you use it. I don't know if that makes sense. So sampling is using the Alt key or the Option key. You have to hold that down to make a sample. So say, for instance, if I hold the Option key, you'll see that the cursor changes from a brush to kind of a sampling type tool. So like when we're using the eyedropper, it's a very similar look, right? So basically what it's going to do is it's going to take a picture in the size of the brush I have right now. So if I click on this eyeball, you see how I get a sample of the eye. And if I paint, it'll put an eye there. And so it's kind of wherever you sample. So if I hold Alt again and press again, I get the corner of the eye, or I can sample a portion of her nose. Now, this doesn't make perfect sense right now. When we go to fixing an image, what we're going to do, like there's always the fixing old images or those sorts of things. So we'll get a little more into this tool, but I want you to see it now. So again, a little bit weird like that, but what I want to try and do is get rid of this spot right here. And I want to get rid of that little chunk there. So what I'm going to look for is something that's similar. I'm looking for tone, and I'm looking for shadow. You can see the skin tone right there is a little bit in shadow. It has a little bit of a curvature, but not very much. So I'm going to pick somewhere right about here. I think looks good. You see how that section right there looks similar to that section? So I'm just going to hold my Alt key, sample this section right there, and I'm going to put it up over that right there. Now the thing about this is that it's pretty clever because it's not like a clone stamp, which we'll talk about next week. This one is, remember, it has qualities of artificial intelligence. So it's going to take the pixels behind itself and the pixels you have selected right now. It's going to try to make decisions based on what you choose, right? So if I click on this, notice it sort of shows you can almost see the edge right there, right? But watch when I click, it's going to, you see how it actually took the background. It doesn't look the same as when I put the brush on there. So it took the shading of the eye area here, and it took what was there, and it kind of tried to mash all that together into one chunk. And it's neither what it was nor what it sampled. It's a little bit of both. And I have no real control over that entirely. I mean, I'm just kind of guessing. So if I pick the right tonal region and click within there, it's probably going to work out. So it's a pretty great tool, but so how the heck did I zoom in here? Okay, there we go. It works really pretty well, so I did that on the Gone layer, but it's the difference. So the healing brush, you can do more intense examples, right? So let's do crazy. I'll call this layer crazy. You know, like I said, I can sample out the eye. Make this a little bit bigger. And you see how it kind of paints out. It's like I can do that. I mean, it doesn't look super great, right? Let's do replace. So if I do replace, notice it's not going to try to do the same kind of thing. It's going to actually just totally paint it right in. See how replace doesn't use that predictive quality? It just literally totally replaces. So see how the edges don't do what it did before. It's a good example of normal. And just notice that when I paint up here, it's going to try and take into account that this is a lighter area, right? That's why it's coming out kind of light. So it's saying, well, I'm putting this into kind of a light area. Okay, so I'm going to try and make it a little bit lighter. So it doesn't really work out super great. Let's sample her lips and put her lips up here. Yeah, so just notice that it's a combination of both the colors, right? So it doesn't really do what we want necessarily, but you can get a little bit crazy with it. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. I don't think it's really the right tool for what we're trying to do, but sometimes it works pretty well. Okay, so that's the basic idea, and that's what I want you guys to work on, is getting this image to look as clean as possible.